saying yes to something else and getting curious about what they're saying yes to.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. So you could say to your child, okay, it's time to turn the TV off and come to dinner. And they say, no. And so you can get mad at them for not being cooperative, or you can think, okay, they're saying no to me. What are they saying yes to? And there's something in them that wants to enjoy the show, be relaxed. Maybe it's even a need for autonomy, to have some self-direction, choice, not to be told what to do, but to be asked as opposed to demanding. So there's all kinds of things that could be going on inside of them. And if we start getting curious to the no and wondering what's going on for them, then it may be different. I remember my daughter used to say to me when she was little, Mommy, I don't know how to do what you want me to do and not be resentful. But I don't know if I do what I want to do, if you're going to be resentful. So what do we do about this?
Wow.
So breaking out of this idea that I'm supposed to just do as I'm told as the child, and to recognize that children are people too. They're going to have perspectives. They're going to have their own experience. There are going to be times when they don't want to do things, and that is not disrespect. Right now, no is equal to disrespect for most parents.
Exactly.
How dare you say no to me? What are you doing? And they turn it into this whole big thing about defiance. And the problem with that is that it doesn't give children much of an opportunity to have their own voice. How do they object? How do they say what their preference is? And that's not to say that we don't need children to get off their devices, and we don't need children to go to bed, and we don't need them to come. All of those things are also true. But when we meet with resistance, instead of using more power over someone to bend their will and do what you want, it's an opportunity for us to listen. And if we see children as people too, then it would be no different than an adult saying, no, I don't want to do that right now. In which case we wouldn't go into some, tirade about how you're being disrespectful. We would simply look at them as, oh, you have some other plan other than my plan for you.
Yeah. Wow, that sounds really interesting. So I hear a couple of points. That first of all, what usually triggers parents or make parents feel tired is that I want you to do it my way. Like if you are not following what I'm saying, is like being disrespectful.
Correct.
Yeah, so that's one. I also hear that I think maybe there are different ways you can ask questions to leave them with some choice.
That's the best, is if you can actually, when they say no to you, rather than becoming outraged that they've said no, it's an opportunity for a parent to stop, to pause for a second and to wonder, so something's going on for you that's getting in the way of you cooperating with me. And that opens up a door for conversation where a child can then respond and say, yeah, my show isn't over yet. I don't want to turn it off in the middle of the program. It's only 5 more minutes. Why can't? And now you're like, oh, okay, 5 more minutes then. No problem. I didn't understand. And now we're into a normal sort of conversation.
Interesting. Okay, so basically when even they say no, but if you continue, you are not resisting and you continue the conversation, you will discover what's over there with them. And at the same time, they can possibly offer another option. They will, do this, and then they will do what you ask for.
That's right. Exactly. It's a changing your mind that a no is bad behavior. So if you no longer have the judgment around the no being bad, and the no is just information, it's information that this person is having trouble giving you their yes. Maybe it's possible that they heard you as demanding, not requesting. Maybe they heard you as being disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
and not taking into consideration their feelings and needs.
Mm.
Because children
Wow.
are people too, but we don't really think of them as people. We think of them as just supposing
They are mine. They are mine.
do as you're told. They're mine. That's right. And I'm going to make them do things.
Uh-huh.
And it's my job even to make them do things.
Uh-huh.
If we have that perspective, then we have marginalized them. In fact, I believe that they're a marginalized community. That even though developmentally, of course, there are going to be different developmental milestones, there are going to be different things that are developmentally normal, but there's a bandwidth around that also, depending on the age of the child, what you can expect of them is to be reasonable. But instead, what parents do is they get all upset when the child says no. And then they start to do things like, if you don't do as I say, right now, young lady, no TV for a week, no dessert, no friend, no this, no that. They take things away and they use rewards and punishments in order to make a child do what they want them to do. That activates retaliation, rebellion, and resistance.
Wow.
And so we call those the secondary problems, but most people have created a lot of secondary problems. And then they spend all their time dealing with the 3 R's, the retaliation, the rebellion, the resistance that was activated by a controlling form of discipline that didn't hear the no as a yes to something inside the child. It heard it as disrespect.
Wow. Okay. And I think there might be situations people, like children, they will say no right in front of your face. And there might be times that in their heart they are actually a no, but they just didn't say anything. Right? In those situations, you are still you are listening, like actually to how do you work with children that they don't like to express themselves?
Well, a lot of children have learned not to express themselves because parents have trained them basically not to have a voice. They've been trained to be obedient and compliant and do as they're told. And the problem with obedience and compliance is that once you train someone to be obedient and compliant, they lose their sense of discernment. They can no longer ascertain, is this someone who has my best interests at heart, for whom I should be obedient and compliant? Although, frankly, we never want children to learn how to be obedient and compliant because they can't tell the difference between someone who has their best interest at heart and someone who doesn't. And there's a psychological differential between a child and an adult that's extremely difficult for a child to overcome. So even an empowered child is going to have a lot of problems speaking up because they have probably been experiencing that when they speak up, they get in trouble. And so what they do is they learn to put themselves aside and kind of check out and just do what other people want them to do, which is extremely dangerous.
Yeah, I feel like when you are putting yourself on the side or withhold your communication, like not be fully expressed, that is what I'm hearing actually is a word like numb, like they become numb.
Yeah. Numb, disconnected, they're just not able to express themselves. I talk about how important it is for us to keep children connected to their inner voice, their inner sense of knowingness. To keep a child connected to their inner sense of knowingness, we have to be able as adults to sense into when they're doing what we want them to do because they're afraid of us, and when they're doing what we've asked them to do out of consideration. And they're genuinely authentically willing to. So if we look at children as people too, and we recognize that sometimes they are going to have other things going on, just like any adult would, and that if they're not able to speak up about it, we need to really encourage that. So one of the people I trained with was Marshall Rosenberg, the founder of the Center for Nonviolent Communication and the father of restorative justice. And Rosenberg used to say, never let someone tell you yes when you know what they mean is no. If you let people pretend that they're a yes when they're authentically a no, you're going to pay for that. Eventually, it's going to come back as a resentment flow. So it's better for us to really learn to be authentic. And if there's something in the way of your genuine yes, then let me talk about that with you. Let me hear what's going on for you. I genuinely care about you. And if this isn't okay for you, then I'd like to know more.
Wow. And what is so it sounds like, what is a good age to start to cultivate that inner voice and for them to like fully express themselves? Or maybe when they were born, they were just like so free. At some point they got trained to stop talking.
Exactly. I think the reality is that we are trained that other people blame us for their feelings. They make us believe that we're responsible for their overreactions, that it's our fault because we didn't cooperate, for example, and that when an adult gets upset because a child doesn't cooperate and they get a no, the adult tries to convince the child that they made them overreact. They try to convince the child that it's their fault for the reaction that they have, when nothing could be further from the truth. Other people don't make us feel our feelings. Our feelings arise. And 10 people in a room, each of us experience a child saying no. We may each have a very different response to it.
100%.
So the child didn't evoke the response out of me. My preconditioned mind and the impressions of what went on in my childhood, in my family of origin, that have been carried forward into my adult life, now get triggered by this child's response. It had nothing to do with the child. It's all about my past. But the victim blame consciousness is that you make me feel, and I'm not responsible for my own feelings. Somebody else is responsible. So this is where a lot of adults, when they get into parenting, they're just taken by surprise with all the stuff that is triggered inside of them.
I see. So basically, conscious parenting is you create the consciousness, awareness of your own reaction, your emotions, even like something is triggered from the past, that you just create that awareness so that you don't be manipulated or controlled by that.
Yes, let's put it that way. It's a good way of saying it, that you're not manipulated or controlled by it, and that it isn't manipulating and trying to control another person through you. Because when we're triggered, we're manipulative.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That sounds like a challenging work to do. Now, how do you work with parents? How do you actually coaching them, like have them to build that awareness? I think like building something takes practice, takes time, effort, all of that. How do you support all the parents to actually be that way?
It's true. I mean, none of us can wave a magic wand and somehow transcend our own irrational unconscious beliefs. But if we have the awareness that this is really all about me, and that I'm the one who's in the overreaction, and that you triggered it, you're the catalyst of this, but you're not the cause. So the differentiation between catalyst and the cause of how I feel is the first big step. So up until this point, people may be catalyzed and think it was actually, you made me feel this way, it's your fault. And then with that mindset, we justify why we punish the other person, because we've believed the lie that they're responsible for our feelings. But with that mindset shift, actually, no, you're not responsible. You didn't make me feel, but I have feelings, and this event catalyzed those feelings. Now I'm aware of the fact that there's something in me that is activated, and I can turn toward that something. I can be with that something, and I can be bigger than what's bugging me. So that's kind of one of the practices that I have, is the ability to get bigger than what's bugging you. And that really is the observer mind. That is the capacity to be with something as it is, and be present to it, but not merged with it. I use the word merged. So when we're merged with it, we lose our identity into it. We become the emotion. We think we're that.
Wow, that sounds very powerful. Hi, to clarify. Okay. Wow. And that for example, if that someone wants to be coached by you for conscious parenting, how long does it take, or how many sessions they
So
take?
I have a 90-day parenting reboot. So it's 3 months. It's truly 3 months of weekly coaching calls with me and a group of parents that are enrolled in the program. And then every week between my Monday coaching calls, I have pre-recorded training videos in my learning management system on the website. So my website is consciousparentingrevolution.com. And that's where a lot of parents can go. I weekly blog. I have newsletters. I have a free ebook on really trying to, 7 strategies to overcome conflict with your children. And if people would like to get into the training program, then they basically are coached in my coaching every week for 3 months. They have the training videos between all of the coaching calls. And then in addition, I work with a pediatrician. And so they have monthly sessions with her one-on-one for half an hour, because sometimes there are things that irritate the nervous system of a child, and that we can attribute the nervous system irritation to the behavior. But 75% of the time, it's a result of parents using power over their children when they're trying to resolve conflict. And they're going about it in all the ways that are going to activate the retaliation, rebellion, and resistance. And we know from the research, 75% of behavioral disruptions are a result of power being used over. So learning how to use assertive skills and collaborative problem solving, and listen for the underlying unmet needs, and being able to hear beyond the no to what they're saying yes to. I mean, that's all part of the training, is becoming conscious of how to communicate with children in a way that you create consideration for each other as opposed to obedience and compliance.
Well, I think there might be, a question, that sounds very interesting. And while you are sharing that, in my head, I have a question that, how can you tell whether that is inner voice of a kid versus they just want to have a conflict, or it's their ego, how do you distinguish those two?
Well, actually, that's actually something I cover in the training. What I like to say is, we have a filter in consciousness. Adults have a filter in consciousness that when children act in ways that are upsetting to us, that inconvenience us, we focus on our experience of the child and the impact their breakdown, or their, having difficulty meeting their needs, how that surfaces in them. We focus on how it inconveniences us. And we have a negative view of children. Our way of describing what's going on in the moment is usually with words like, they're disrespectful, they're misbehaving, they're naughty, they're manipulative, they're out to get us. It's kind of this negative script. But if we recognize that we don't use that same script if we're looking at a child who's having developmental difficulty reaching a milestone, like reading or writing or arithmetic. If they're having a developmental difficulty reaching a milestone, we get them support. We might hire a tutor. We might take them to an occupational therapist. We might look for additional supports. We don't see it as bad, misbehaving, naughty, out to get us, manipulative. We see it as someone who is having difficulty meeting a milestone. But if it's behavior, we describe the situation to ourselves based on our experience of the meltdown.
So what I'm hearing is basically, instead of making it something personal, like whatever is not happening as you wanted to, you find a constructive solution, or you, so first of all, you remove that, it has nothing to do with you, and then you find some way to like support the kids.
Yes,
or
that's it.
Yeah,
exactly. You first take away that mindset that has you describing it as manipulative, out to get me, disobedient, disrespectful, naughty, all those nasty words. You take away the negative judgment. And just taking away the judgment puts us in that land, you know, the one that Rumi talks about, that field over there beyond right doing and wrong doing. We move into that field where we just see it as behavior. And we look at behavior as the manifestation of an unmet need. And we become curious about the needs under which the child is struggling to meet. Wow. And when people, any human being, a child or an adult, cannot meet their needs, their inability to meet their needs gives rise to feelings. And those are the feelings that we see surfacing through behavior. So if somebody's anxious, angry, frustrated, hurt, sad, those emotions, those feelings come through behavior in different ways. Some people could throw down their books. Somebody could kick their brother or sister. Somebody could slam a door. So we can look at the behaviors and we can take the behaviors out of context and we could say that's a good behavior, that's a bad behavior, that's a right behavior, that's a wrong behavior. But if we don't use that as the context for our understanding, we just see it as behavior. And some behaviors are more tragic than others, which is why I call it the tragic expression of the unmet need. The tragic expression of the unmet need is usually really socially unacceptable, hard to be around. It's definitely going to be hard for me to be around. And I can make it about my experience, or I can go, this isn't about my experience. This is about the person who's drowning. I wonder what's going on for them. I wonder what needs of theirs they're having difficulty meeting, which have given rise to these feelings and these behaviors. So a traditional parenting model focuses on manipulating the surface behaviors so that children are well behaved. And a conscious parenting revolution focuses on the underlying unmet needs and going to the source of the disruptive behavior and figuring out what's happening at source and working at that level. Because once you solve the underlying problem, all the surface behaviors disappear.
Wow, that sounds really powerful. So quick exercise for everyone, whoever is watching this recording, is first of all, take whatever negative thought or opinions, perspectives you have for your kids to, like whatever trash can, basket, remove it. Like try it right now, like remove it. And whenever, yes, keep doing that. And then whenever there's some behavior, just take a look and see what is beneath it, what is underlying the emotions or feelings.
What's the underlying unmet need that's given rise to the feelings? Which then give rise to the behavior. We normally start so far out at the behavior level, and we try to get them to change their behavior without working from the inside out.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I feel like if the underlying unmet need or is not being discovered, it will be just changing. If you can really manipulate the form of the action, it's just changing to another route to come up again.
Precisely, which is why if rewards and punishments worked, you wouldn't have the same problems over and over again. But they don't work. They're a temporary, momentary fix to get someone's behavior manipulated to change to suit you so that you're more comfortable. But it doesn't do anything for the person, this little person over here that's having trouble. They're still having trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we're talking about this, I know it's already 10:33. And if anyone have questions, feel free to ask the questions. But while we were having this conversation, you know what? My boyfriend show up in my head. I was like, wow, there are similarities, right? They are all relationships or like more intimate relationships.
Yeah,
Like even,
and I mean, it's not just children. But, we've been talking in the context of children and their tantrums and their behavior when their needs aren't being met. But really, this applies to adults as well. When our needs aren't being met, it gives rise to a whole host of feelings that are hard for us to be with. And a lot of us who don't have the skill to be able to speak about our inner world end up doing it through our behavior. So the conscious parenting revolution is really beyond just parenting. And it's so funny because a lot of the parents that I do work with, a lot of times it goes from the children's behavior to their partner's behavior. And it really becomes about their husband or their wife and how they're behaving. Yeah, because it's the human dynamic. And none of us really grew up with parents that were consciously aware of how their underlying unmet needs were giving rise to their feelings. Most of us grew up with parents who spoke about, I feel because of this, and this is what you did to me, and that's why I feel this way, and it's your fault. So we're back in the land of blame and thinking that my feelings are connected to what other people do to me. The other way of discussing it is an external locus of causality. So if you believe that events and people make you feel, then you have an external locus, that the outside world is responsible for how you're feeling. And the conscious parenting revolution has an internal locus where we work with families and support parents to be able to help their children recognize that they can feel better whether they can change the outer world or not.
Wow. Okay, I see someone someone just requested to join this live. Do you want to bring him onto the video?
I don't know who it is. Sure, go ahead.
Okay. I don't know who he is as well.
This is dangerous.
Right? Okay. Yeah, it's okay. Anyway, so that sounds really, really powerful.
It's so powerful. Yeah, for us to have that education that other people aren't responsible for how we feel. Marshall used to talk about 3 levels of emotional development, and maybe I'll just share this and we probably need to wrap up. But he spoke about level 1 being emotional slavery, where people believe that other people are responsible for how they feel. And so they enslave those people in order to do what they need them to do so that they feel okay. And I always like to say to people, I want you to look at that from the perspective of who do you blame for your feelings? And who is blaming you for their feelings? And at this level, we call it emotional slavery because we're constantly being made to feel that we're responsible for other people's feelings, or they're being made to feel they're responsible for ours. He said the next level of development is emotional obnoxiousness. And that's where you get so tired of being blamed for other people's feelings that you get to the point where you're like, screw you. I'm not responsible for how you feel, and I'm not going to be blamed for it any longer. You take care of your feelings. It's not my job. So he says it's like going from one extreme to the other. And emotional liberation is developing to the point where the truth is, you're right. I'm not responsible for how you feel, but I care about you. And so if you're having feelings that are hard or difficult, I'd like to be there with you through this, not because it's my fault, but because I care about you. So that's the emotional liberation, is moving past the slavery and obnoxiousness into this third stage.
Yeah, I can feel that when you are saying that the love and care is there. And I think if someone is sharing that, communicating that with me, I will be, I think probably my emotion, it will be just have how do you like a flowing communication, like conversation is just like free. I feel like I have space to actually talk.
To tell the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. That's powerful.
It's so powerful. I mean, and the last thing I'll say is that when we don't create the atmosphere, when people can tell us what's really going on for them, and we can't create that atmosphere if we've convinced them they're responsible for how we're feeling or vice versa, then what we do is we just stop sharing, or we lie, and we have all of our behaviors that we hide, but we don't bring them out and share them because we're worried about what the other person is going to say. And so what we really learn to do is we learn how to become really good liars.
Okay, so I think we are going to wrap up, and I will ask one last question.
Okay.
So I could be a big one. So that's, well, maybe you could share the impact, right, without conscious parenting, and this is how does it look like within the family, or it could be there's an impact for children growing up. How does it look like? Or if they could, parents can consider to learn and practice conscious parenting, what could be like, what does it look, in your family and for your children to grow up as a human being?
Wow, it is a big final question. But it's all right. I'll give you the truncated version of the response.
Yeah, please.
So I think a lot of us already know what it's like if we don't grow up with conscious parents. I have 3 TED Talks, and one of my TED Talks was on surviving unconscious parenting. And one of the ways that we survive unconscious parenting is that we just—
Hold on 1 second. Sorry, Katherine. The reason I ask is, for example, my parents, or maybe some like an older generation, or people, they might think, I grew up this way, and it has been like this, and people are growing up in this environment. They can be successful. They can just learn something themselves, and they can develop themselves. It doesn't have to. There might be conflict in my home, but I think we'll be fine. We'll still be successful. So that's why I asked this question, because I think we can see what actually will be happening and what could be different.
So we may end up having to do another one of these, Lan, because it's a huge, you've opened up a huge can of worms.
Wow.
And I think I lived in Hong Kong for the last 32 years. And so a lot of my coaching has been in the private schools throughout Hong Kong. And Hong Kong has the highest suicide rate among young women in the world.
Wow.
Yes, it's an epidemic. And a lot of those young women are so desperate because they have lived in this world that I just spoke to you about, where they're made to believe that they can bring shame on their family if they don't do well academically. That they can be an embarrassment to their family and make their family feel a certain way if they're not successful. So it's the classic case of this blaming children for how the family feels, as if a child can be responsible for that. I think
absolutely. I can totally relate to that. That's why
I was going to say, this whole story, because it's part of the Chinese culture. It's also part of the Korean culture, the Japanese culture, to a lesser extent, the European and the American culture, but also present, where there's something in the whole family. Like I grew up with the conversation where, what will the neighbors think? And don't embarrass us. And you behave well when you go outside, because otherwise you're an embarrassment. So it's very similar. In fact, it's not that different between the Chinese and the Asian cultures and the American culture, ironically. But it's a very big part of that filial piety, and you make the family proud, and all of that pressure. All of that pressure can lead one to feel as though they have disappointed, embarrassed, ashamed the family, and their only thing that they could possibly do is take their life. And that's why it's such a big issue in Asia.
Oh, okay. So
The conscious parenting revolution is necessary.
mhm.
It's necessary. We got to get there. We get to set our children free.
Yeah.
We get to let them be separated and individuated. And I talk a lot about that in my trainings. I talk about separation and individuation. Because most of us don't grow up in families that allow for that, because separation and individuation means that I may not be in agreement with you, and it's not going to mean that I'm going to be, cast aside. I actually have the freedom within the family culture to speak my mind. We know that freedom to speak our mind is actually a precious freedom.
Totally.
And it's not a given in any culture, but in certain cultures, even more so.
Wow. Okay, I think definitely wants to have another conversation, especially
We're
when
gonna
you
have to
said,
do another one, Line, because we could go
yeah,
on
like,
and on.
yeah,
and
and
on.
especially like I have so many questions that like,
Yeah. We'll do it again. Well, I'd
inspire me.
love to. It's so much fun.
Yeah.
You're just, it's great to speak with you. I love your questions, and you're so bright, and you offer such incredible insight.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are going to wrap up, and remember today, your practice, everyone, is just to move the negative perspectives on the side.
Moving that,
and
that's
as
right.
you do that, you are doing great.
Exactly.
And we'll
it's
come back again.
Huge first step. All right. Sounds good. Thank you so much for inviting me.